All right, folks, if I could get your attention, please. Apologies for starting a few minutes late. We have what we believe will be an interesting and inspiring program for you tonight. My name is Wolff, and I am here today. I'm here today on behalf of the board of the Left Forum, the group that organizes, produces, and brings this event to you. We are very, very proud of this institution as it has become now, and we're particularly proud of this one because of what it says about where the United States is. This is the biggest Left Forum we have ever struggled to produce. Let me turn briefly in my introduction and borrow from Charles Dickens to say that this is the best of times and that this is the worst of times. Those of you who remember The Tale of Two Cities will remember that opening section. We are, I think, at the end of a generation of a malignant kind of capitalism that deepened the inequality of wealth and power around the world, that undid the reforms that earlier generation was able to craft out of the catastrophe of the Great Depression, that is now engaged in literally endless wars, has returned torture to the regular activity of business, and that spreads a kind of corruption on so many levels, it's no longer arresting when we read about it. It puts the planet at risk, and my God, the last few weeks or days of the stories from Japan need no elaboration. And it puts at risk even the most basic things, food and fuel, who are rising in price out of the reach of millions of people around the world and exacerbating everything. And as if that history of 30 years were not enough, what caps it all off is the greatest economic global crisis of capitalism in 75 years. It kind of produces an excess of suffering, which is beginning to change the situation. Not only did the crisis plunge millions in unemployment and throw people out of their homes and diminish the benefits that go with those who keep their jobs and create greater job insecurity, but we then watched governments respond to the crisis by a program of bailing out those who probably were the most responsible for bringing the crisis in the first place, in the vague hope that great research has shown was pointless, that we used to call trickle-down economics. You help the top, and then you hope some of what you've given to the top will trickle down to the rest of us. And as you know, if you've studied history, what happens is really less than a trickle down than a getting pissed on. But I don't want to leave you with a depressing image. So let me now shift from the worst of times to the best of times. We have seen some remarkable things that ought to give us hope and resolve. Perhaps it started in Latin America some years ago, and there was really a sudden change. Neoliberalism began to be discarded in country after country, and radical new leaderships from indigenous people, but from people also who had it with this malignant capitalism that had done such damage in their countries. Then last year, in 2010, we saw developments in Europe that were stunning. General strikes repeatedly in Italy, in France, in Spain. We saw Ireland go from a wonderkind of modern economic capitalism to a basket case problem. And we confronted what that means. And we saw millions of people, many millions in Europe, rising up and shaking their fists against an austerity program with the slogan, "You brought the crisis, you're not going to make us pay for it." And then more recently, we saw dramatic developments that are still unfolding in North Africa and what we call the Middle East. Country after country reacting to these 30 years and all they have meant by beginning to throw out the garbage of those 30 years that had collected and that needed to be ejected in order to get a new start. Last but not least, here, finally, in the country where we wondered a year ago at the last Left Forum, when will all this activism finally come here? And we worried because so many people seemed to be confident that it never would. And now we have Wisconsin. Most importantly, in this country and in so many others, there's an interesting alliance slowly emerging. On the one hand, a generation of young people who are becoming quite clear about the fact that the world they had been led to believe might be there for them if they studied and went to school and got the degrees and got the preparation isn't there. You can go a long time, get a PhD, and if you're lucky, you'll have 4 little adjunct jobs to run around among while you exhaust yourself for a salary that you could also get if you worked at Starbucks. Those young people are turned off badly from the existing political structure. It's not clear where they're going to go, but they are an audience, and they were in large numbers in Madison, Wisconsin, and that's something that let me conclude by pointing out something which comes from me in my practice as an economist. 75 years ago was the last time capitalism collapsed. Excuse me. That time it lasted 11 years. The anger of people led them to join trade unions in massive numbers, more massive than anything that had happened in the country before or since. And we had powerful socialist and communist parties and other political organizations that made a big difference, that put a lot of pressure. There's a reason why Franklin Roosevelt created 11 million jobs by the federal government and filled them, and that the present government doesn't even discuss it. We have to learn that if what we do in these crises is to produce reforms and regulations, that they put a capitalism with a happy face in place of that malignant one. But the face, as we have learned in the last 30 years, that happy face is a mask. And what the authorities allowed in a moment of crisis, they can and they will take back when they feel that's possible. And therefore we should learn, in terms of what we do in this crisis, not to repeat that mistake again. Finally, this is something I say to my students, and it seems to work well with them, so I thought I'd finish with it tonight. Capitalism has proved itself in these recent years to be unjust and extraordinarily unstable. If you lived with a person as unjust and unstable as this, you would long ago have moved or demanded that they get professional help. We can't move out of capitalism, but with things like the Left Forum, we may be taking an important step towards the kinds of transformation that are the social equivalent of professional help. Let me turn now to the first of our speakers. I'm sure many of you know her, her face is familiar. It's Laura Flanders, former Air America radio host. She's now a host and founder and well-known across this country operator of the Grit TV program series. She is the author of the New York Times bestseller, Bush Women, Tales of a Cynical Species. Her latest book is At the Tea Party, a name that tells you much of what you need to know, and there's a wonderful collection of articles in that book that I recommend to you. She writes regularly for The Nation magazine and the Huffington Post, and is a regular contributor at MSNBC. Flanders has appeared on shows from Real Time with Bill Maher to the O'Reilly Factor, Would You Believe It? It is with great pleasure that I introduce Laura Flanders.
with Grit TV contributors. Not to mention Grit TV staff. Let's hear it for the Grit TV staff. Max Ramo, let's see, who do we have here? We've got Esther Armour way back there. We've got Stanley Aronowitz, obviously. Francis is here. Barbara Aaron, Wright, Bill Fletcher, all regulars on Grit TV. And we are taping tonight for posterity, so mind your P's and Q's. I have good news. Not only was it sunny outside, but at about 1 o'clock today, my phone started lighting up, and Monica's probably did also, right? You start getting text messages from Wisconsin. Mine comes from Fred Shepard, who is the one of the good unionized cab drivers of Union Cab in Madison, and he says, the Dane County District Court has put a restraining order on Scott Wolff. The judge said it was very questionable whether it had passed through legal means given the state's 24-hour notice supposed to be given to all legislators. They ran through that bill in 4 minutes without any of the Democratic senators in the chamber. It is on permanent hold, pending a full review. Mary Bell, the president of the biggest public employees union of Wisconsin, the Educational Association, said Wisconsin will not tolerate backroom deals and political power plays when it comes to our public schools and valued services. That feels like kind of halfway up the mountain to me. You just got to imagine, imagine you are Scott Walker in this moment, right? There he is, he thinks, well, I paid for the election. I made sure the courts were stacked. We brought up as much media as we possibly could. He was humming his little anti-union song. And then you have one of those kind of Tsar Mubarak moments. Where he got the word that maybe the palace guard was not on his side. Now, will there be another vote? Probably. Will the result be the same? Quite likely. But I want us right here, right now, to consider what has happened here. Because this is a very big deal. The people over the last 4 weeks stopped a steamroller. They stopped a state steamroller of legislation, of election, of money, of power, of fear, of panic, of pain. They stopped it. Maybe not permanently, but they stopped it for a month. And they stopped it for long enough for something quite beautiful, I think, to grow. So the question becomes, what happens next? And whose survival do we think this is about? Do we yet really believe this is about our survival, those of us in this room? It gets very close. Tony Schultz, another one of the farmers from the family farm Flanders, he better run for office, somebody for Grafton, fantastic guy. He said, 11, I said, how is this going to affect you in your little farm community? And he said, well, 11 of the 44 teachers in my county have received layoff notices. Those are my kids, that's my community, that's the biggest employer in this town. We live in a country now with 59 million people without health insurance, and the fees are going up because there's no cap, no control. 49 million people living in poverty, 44 million living on food stamps. You've got about 400 with the wealth equivalent to 125 million of the rest of us. I think we had a spark. Maybe it was Egypt, maybe it was Tunisia, and it fell on a very dry field. And we had some wind that blew, courtesy of independent media and you. Because you demanded this coverage. You said, okay, we're really glad you went to Wisconsin, but will you go back again? We're really glad you went to Wisconsin, will you go back a third time? You were hungry for this coverage. There was a massive appetite for the reporting that people were doing from Wisconsin. When the mainstream media began to stop very quickly, the more people stayed out in the streets in Tucker Square, the more coverage they got, the more they stayed out in the streets in, around the Capitol in Madison, the less coverage they got. We turned that around. There were protests around the fact that the Sunday shows had no labor representation whatsoever when labor was the issue. We managed to make some change. And that was part of what stopped this ramrod politics. The other thing that I think that stopped the railroad politics was the sense of recognition that there is a reason the public unions are being attacked. And it's not just to attack public unions. It's also so that there will be no resistance when the cuts come. There'll be no last line of defense. And there was a realization it's not just about jobs, it's about dignity. The question of collective bargaining is not just about pay, it's about your right to have a say in your workplace. And we told a story on Great TV about the Triangle Shirtwaist fire, where the young girl, 16-year-old Clara Lemish at the back of Cooper Union Hall got up and said strike when the guys were just talking about talking. And what they were striking for, those women who led the march of the 20,000, although I think it's 30,000, 1909, was for their working conditions to be safe and not to be conditions that killed them. And they went on to kill them in 1911 in the Triangle Shirtwaist fire. So this sense that this is about more than just the details, more than anything having to do with the money that's the only thing we're supposed to be thinking about, was palpable in Wisconsin. And I think people heard a noise. They heard a noise of each other talking. They heard a noise of each other telling their stories about their lives. And they realized, wow, how loud that noise could be. And the eagerness for connection was everywhere. The people that came in and talked to us from Working America said that they had signed up 200,000 people in Wisconsin in a matter of weeks. People were literally pulling their petitions out of their hands saying, we want to sign up. Where can we sign up? What can we do? I'm not a member of the union. I want to do something. The word out of Wisconsin, in addition to solidarity, was giant. Lena Taylor said, Scott Walker has awakened a sleeping giant. Robert Turner, an assemblyman in his beautiful orange shirt that they wore, the assemblyman, to keep the session open and keep the people in the building. He said they've awakened the sleeping giant. The farmers had that sign on their tractors. I want to believe that it's true, but I think we may at the moment still be in the position of mice. Flo Kennedy always said that lots of mice can do as much damage as one lion. But I don't think we should be unrealistic when it comes to what structural entities exist. I don't know how much longer to go there. You've got that worried expression. What structural entities exist to be able to carry this organizing forward. We have a beautiful, spontaneous thing that wasn't top down, it was bottom up. But we have 30 years of fracturing that divides us, that has led people to believe that they're one another's enemy, that somebody else has, which means you won't get yours. Petty resentments, as Tony Schultz said, that have been amplified by talk radio to convince some people that a firefighter's pension is the problem. We have 30 years of fracturing to try to overcome. Will solidarity alone do it? I don't know. We do have people ready, a dry field and some wind. We need operational unity, we need institutions, and then I think finally we need vision. And we need an answer to people like Kaiser Bay and Monica's question, which is, the slogan inside the Capitol, and the Capitol was held for all those days by young people. The slogan inside the Capitol was, whose house, our house? And I think we want to think about that. How many people in this room have experienced unemployment in the last 3 years? How many people in this room are struggling with mortgages, mortgage debt, credit card debt, student debt? How many people in this room know somebody who's studying in the military? This isn't somewhere else. This is right here. Whose house? Our house. Thanks.
He has been a champion for racial justice since he was a child. His writing, speaking, and teaching weave together the traditions of the Black Baptist Church, progressive politics, and jazz. He's written more than 20 books and teaches in the Center for African American Studies in the Department of Religion, itself quite a combination, at Princeton University in New Jersey. But before turning the podium over to you, I thought I might mention something you may not know about Cornel West that I learned in my association over many years with him. During the 1980s and 90s, when it was not chic and not politic and not good for one's career to be clearly and openly supportive of the study and teaching of Marxian theory in the United States, Cornel West went out of his way to make sure people understood, in the black and white communities alike, that taking Marxism seriously as an intellectual tradition was part of what he understood to be a decent, educated person in the United States. And for that, he deserves an awful lot of support.
Thank you very much for blessing. We're going to be here last form 2011, and something is happening not just in the midst of the American empire in Wisconsin. Something is happening in the northern section of Africa, in the Middle East. Latin America had leaders there, and lo and behold, in other corners of the globe. Let's give everyday people who are contributing to the radical democratic awakening a hand. That's what we're here for. They're going somewhere, the folk can't ride it back unless it's bent. And it's been bent for too long. Much too long. We talk about politics and solidarity. We're not just talking about the present. We need to bring together the three dimensions of time: the past, the present, and the future. When I think of solidarity, I want to be in solidarity with Martin Luther King Jr. I want to be in solidarity with Paul Rose. I want to be in solidarity with Norman Thomas, Muriel Rookheiser, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, Philip Berrigan. Solidarity has to do with those in the past who are wrestling with the same question that we are wrestling with, which is, what does it mean to be a leftist? What does it mean to be progressive? Do we really have the courage to engage on a quest for the truth, understanding that the condition of truth is to allow suffering to speak? And when you allow suffering to speak, all of a sudden, those France alone called the wretched of the earth begin to raise their voices. Poor people, working people, those wrestling with white supremacy and male supremacy, those wrestling with homophobia, those wrestling with imperial subjugation. They could be in Latin America, Asia, Africa, they could be in the Middle East, they could be in Central America, allowing their voices to be heard. Why? Because their humanity has been rendered invisible. Oftentimes they have been viewed as superfluous people who do not matter, who do not count. And to be a leftist in the 19th century, the 20th century, or the 21st century is to say, we are in solidarity with, namely, we just don't work alongside. We actually love those brothers and sisters. We care for those brothers and sisters. We don't care what's coming around, not red, yellow, brown, or whatever. And we're going down fighting because we're concerned about their humanity. We want them to live life in such a way that they can flower and flourish. And isn't it something that to believe that is to be radical?
There are some noble elements to American democracy. I would be the first to say so.
But there's some vicious, imperial, racist, sexist, homophobic, classic elements too. And we have to be honest about it.
And we haven't had enough people to be courageous. Why? Because after the death of Martin in '68, and after the repression of the social movements in the 60s and 70s, feminist and anti-homophobic and racial and class movements, so many folks caved in and decided they'd rather be comfortable than free. They'd rather be well adjusted to injustice and well adapted to indifference than really be in solidarity with those who came before, the great forefathers and foremothers of all colors who said, we want to be courageous in our quest for truth, allowing suffering to speak, and in our deep love and care for those folk catching hell. And one of the challenges is how we pass this on to the younger generation. We have got to highlight young people. Why? Because it's the young folk who have been in the vanguard in Northern Africa in the last few weeks, who have been willing to sacrifice, to live and die for some grand democratic ideal in the face of U.S.-backed tyranny. It's been the young folks that have been around our workers. And the question becomes, how do we pass it on? Well, the first thing you do is stand clear. You look back, and you're in solidarity with Daniel Singers, the Michael Henry times. I know Stanley Ryan was still around, but he's an older brother now. Steve Roll's still around, he's an older brother now, yes. Brother Enright still going strong with solidarity with Sister Barbara. 35 years of struggle together. Why? Because when we look at their examples, we see people who are rare these days, which is what? They will not sell themselves for the highest bidder. They won't sell themselves for a mess of pottage. They refuse to be sold. And everybody these days is up for sale. Nearly everybody's up for sale. And what do we have? We got Obama in the White House. Charismatic version of American exceptionalism with Keynesian neoliberalism at home and but when it came time for policy, where was Jamal and Letitia? Where was Warren and where was Derek? The everyday people in terms of this deal. He said, oh, Brother West, you supported me, brother. Yes, I did. I supported and you did too. I was a critical support. I wanted to bring the age of Reagan to a close. And McCain and Palin was a catastrophic response to catastrophe. But we understand when the empire is in decline, the culture is in decay, the political system is broken. The system's been colonized by both the Wall Street oligarchs and the corporate elites. And the culture is full of decay with weapons of mass destruction. Nobody wants to zero in on the most crucial issues enough. But awakening is taking place. Left form is an integral part of that. Let us do our role. What a blessing for you today.